As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Even Republican stewards, like current Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, are starting to notice that something is shifting in the party. While McConnell announced recently that he would step down as Republican leader in the U.S. Senate, in an interview last week, he was adamant that he would continue to serve out his term in the Senate with one purpose in mind: fighting back against the isolationist movement in my own party. He sounds worried. What McConnell deems to be isolationism had for much of our history been called America's traditional foreign policy. There have been major exceptions, but until the emergence of the neoconservatives starting in the late 1970s, we largely adhered to the words of John Quincy Adams that America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Why is that? The idea had always been that we would have more influence on freedom worldwide by concentrating on demonstrating the benefits of a free market economy and protection of our constitutional liberties at home. The U.S. would lead the world by example rather than leading at the barrel of a gun. When we strayed from that idea, we got disasters like Vietnam. But then in the 1980s, the neoconservatives seized control of the foreign policy of the Republican Party, and eventually much of the Democratic Party. They were determined to remake the world in their image through the use of force. The military-industrial complex and all the special interests loved this takeover because it meant a huge transfer of wealth from the middle class to them, the moneyed interest class. The American people at first accepted the hollow promises of the interventionist neocons, believing, as they were told, that it was the patriotic thing to do. What we are now seeing, and is evident in the polls as well as in the speeches of our politicians, is a shift away from interventionism. The mood has changed, and more Americans are tired of being told they must sacrifice to save the rest of the world from itself. Recently, Colonel Douglas McGregor posted on Twitter, "We have lost $14 trillion over the last 20 years on dumb interventions in other countries. What good has it done?" Many Republicans are asking that same question. What have we gotten for the first $100 billion to Ukraine? A victory for freedom like we were promised? No, we got rampaging inflation, decreasing standard of living, and demands for another $100 billion. What did we get for the trillions of dollars we spent in the 20-year war in Afghanistan? Peace and democracy in the region? Hardly. As it's often said, we spent 20 years in Afghanistan replacing the Taliban with the Taliban. All the money wasted, all the lives destroyed, all the blood spilled over the 20 years, and the interventionists achieved nothing. Worse than nothing. Speaker Mike Johnson is facing serious pressure from House Republicans over his desire to keep spending on overseas intervention. That's one reason the National Security Supplemental Foreign Aid Bill has not been brought to the floor. All of a sudden, interventionism is a loser with more of the American people, and politicians are paying attention. McConnell may think that he can stem the tide by preaching more intervention, but not even the Senate Republican leader can stop an idea whose time has come.
So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday that there is a date set for Israel's plans to attack the southern Gaza Strip city of Rafah, but he didn't say what the date is. He said, quote, "The victory requires entry into Rafah and the elimination of the terrorist battalions there. It will happen. There is a date," end quote. So his comments came a day after the Israeli military withdrew troops from areas of southern Gaza, including the city of Khan Yunis, which it left in ruins. I mean, completely destroyed that city. And Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, said that the purpose of the withdrawal was to prepare for the invasion of Rafah. And so in response to what Netanyahu said here, the State Department said that they were not briefed by Israel on any potential date. The U.S. has said that it is opposed to Israel's plans to invade Rafah just because of, the over 1 million Palestinians who are sheltered there, and it would incur these huge civilian casualties. So the U.S. has said that they're against the plan, but it doesn't seem like they're threatening any sort of consequences if they go through with this. And we've seen Netanyahu and other Israeli officials say that they don't care. They keep saying, we're going to do it, doesn't matter what the U.S. thinks. So Matt Miller, again, the State Department spokesman, said that Israel hasn't informed them, and he reiterated the U.S. opposition to the plan to attack the city. Again, we still see the bombs, throughout the past few months. We've seen the U.S. warning Israel not to attack Rafah. And what has Israel said? They keep saying, well, we're going to do it. And the U.S. keeps giving them bombs. So more than 500,000 people have cast protest votes against President Biden's support for the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza in Democratic primaries across the country. According to The Nation, 530,502 people voted uncommitted or uninstructed where it's available on the ballot. The movement started in Michigan, which, of course, is a big swing state, and there they had over 100,000 people vote uncommitted. And there was a big one in Wisconsin last week, nearly 50,000 votes in Wisconsin, and that far exceeded what the organizers were hoping for. They wanted to secure 20,000 votes, which was the margin of victory for Biden over Trump in 2020. So the fact that they more than doubled that shows that Biden really is in trouble. And we've seen Democrats say that they think this is going to cost Biden in November. And despite, some of these things that we've seen Biden say over the past few days in response to the World Central Kitchen workers being slaughtered, there's no indication that he's really considering a big change in policy when it comes to supporting this horrific genocidal war that's happening in Gaza. So both Hamas officials and Israeli officials said on Monday that no progress was made toward a hostage deal in Egyptian and Qatari-mediated ceasefire negotiations that are taking place in Cairo. Ali Barakam, a senior Hamas official based in Lebanon, said the Palestinian group had rejected the latest proposal from Israel. He said, quote, "We reject the latest Israeli proposals that the Egyptian side informed us of. The Politburo met today and decided this," end quote. Another unnamed Hamas official said that Israel had not changed its position, so that there was nothing new in the Cairo talks. And an Israeli official told Ynet that they still don't see a deal on the horizon and said that the two sides are still far apart. So a Hamas official told CNN that Israel's latest proposal did not address Hamas's key demands, which include a permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. That is what Hamas is sticking to. This official said, quote, "The Israeli proposal does not respond to the questions that Hamas has asked in its original proposal, and that is any agreement should clearly include a ceasefire, a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops, even if it happens through stages, and the return of the displaced in complete freedom to their homes," end quote. So the CNN report said that CIA Director William Burns had presented a deal to bridge the gaps between the two sides. So there's this U.S. proposal, and the first phase of this would involve the release of 40 Israeli hostages in exchange for about 900 Palestinian prisoners. The U.S. would also like Israel to allow Palestinians who fled from northern Gaza to be able to return to the north, and apparently that's a big sticking point. Israel doesn't want to do that, so the big thing seemed to be the idea of a permanent ceasefire and letting the Palestinians go north. So, they're talking about freeing 40 Israeli hostages here. There was that recent Haaretz report that I covered that I think went pretty under the radar. I don't think many people noticed this, that it says Israeli intelligence believes that only 60 to 70 hostages in Gaza are still alive. So 40 would be most of the remaining hostages. So pressure is mounting on Netanyahu to reach a hostage deal, and Israeli officials have accused him of intentionally sabotaging the talks. Netanyahu has made clear that any ceasefire he agrees to would only be temporary, as he is vowing to launch an invasion of Rafah. Of course, as I mentioned in the last story, he set a date to attack the city, or he said that he did. This is interesting, Yair Lapid, the former Israeli prime minister, who currently leads the main opposition party in the Israeli Knesset, he's in the U.S. this week, speaking with U.S. officials. He met with Antony Blinken on Monday, and he called for a hostage deal to happen. He said, quote, "A hostage deal is doable. It is a difficult deal. That is a deal we may not like, but it's doable and therefore needs to be made," end quote.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
BB, you're a bad boy. I know. Thanks for the bombs. All right? Total fucking bullshit spewing out of the mouth of these warmongering little freaks. That's all these little pricks are. Little fucking warmongering son of a bitches and bastards that just keep it going. And spewing out the bullshit. Oh, Biden has to. Oh, Netanyahu and Biden are they're nasty words to each other. It's all bullshit. And if you don't believe it's bullshit, how about the bullshit spewing out a fat boy murderous mouth of Lloyd Austin? Yep, just came out before it went on the air. No evidence of genocide in Gaza, Pentagon chief says. Yeah, Pentagon chief. A murderer. The slaughtered people when he ran as general over there in Iraq and Afghanistan. Not genocide? How about the definition of genocide, Austin? Oh, by Oxford Language. The deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying the nation or group. Yep. Genocide. Oh, don't believe me? How about a little ugly piece of arrogant shit? Hey, take it easy, Salenti. I'm Trump's son-in-law. I'm Jared Kushner. Oh, don't you know who my daddy is? Oh, my daddy was the Kushner that gave Trump $1 million for his campaign when he pardoned him for the crimes that he committed. Oh, I'm that Jared Kushner, and I spoke at Harvard. I spoke at Harvard in February, and this is the shit, the genocidal shit that spewed out of my arrogant fucking mouth. Gaza waterfront property could be very valuable. It's a little bit of an, very valuable waterfront property, and suggested Israel should remove civilians while it, quote, cleans up the strip. Genocide. Oh, this is from The Guardian. Hardly reported in the American media. You know why? Because they're all little fucking scumbag prostitutes. Little pieces of shit that suck up to their corporate pimps and their government whoremasters. 6 companies control over 90% of Americans' media, all owned by the bigs. He goes on, quote, it's a little bit unfortunate situation there. Little bit unfortunate situation. You killed over 33,000 people. You bombed the fucking place into ruin. People are starving to death. Over 80,000 seriously wounded. 40% of those dead children. 30% women. Look at it. Oh, no, it's a little bit of an unfortunate situation. Kushner said Israel should, quote, finish the job by moving the Palestinians to the Negev desert. Yep. But in addition to that, I would just bulldoze something in the Negev. I'd move the people over there. Yep. I think that's the better option, so you can finish the job. That's the quote. Where is the outrage? They're only Palestinians, Salenti. And he goes on, ready? I'm sitting in Miami Beach right now, Kushner said, and I'm looking at the situation, and I'm thinking what I would do if I was there. Hey, go over there and do something, fuckface. Go over there and do something. Oh, by the way, Netanyahu's kid who's not fighting over there either, he's in Miami too. Go back to your Trends Journal. Week after week, month after month, for nearly a year and a half, we had forecast that Ukraine is going to ramp up their war against Russia by either attacking deep into Russia and or attacking a nuclear power plant. We got the Israel war, the Ukraine war, and America now ramping up the Middle East war. World War III has begun. There's going to be a false flag event, something major happening. So when I say World War III is going to happen with a false flag event, or a 9/11 2.0, or Ukraine bombing a nuclear power plant or something like that, get ready for it. It's going to happen. Yeah. One article after another, been saying it over and over. Oh, what happened? Oh, they just bombed a nuclear power plant. 5 drone strikes into it. World War III has begun. Why am I angry? Because it's morally justifiable to be angry when people are committing immoral acts. And if you're not angry when you see this immorality, you are immoral, said St. Thomas Aquinas. World War III has begun. And if we don't stop it, it's going to be a wipeout. Hey, did you see the solar eclipse yesterday? That was all the fucking news. The Taylor Swift get fucked up in the second. Yeah, I mean, that's the news.
You have written, starting with Ukraine now, that events in Ukraine have mobilized or solidified Asia, Africa, Latin America, and parts of Europe against the United States and the West. Can you explain what you mean by that, please, Colonel?
Well, you have to look at a number of things, but most important, we have appealed to the world to back this proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, and it hasn't worked. When you look at most of the so-called developing world, it's almost universally behind Russia. And naturally, it has helped enormously for China and India, and which represent, let's put it bluntly, almost half or more of the population of the planet, to sign on for Russia. So then you add to this the BRICS issue, and even though BRICS only has at this point 8 or 9 members, the truth is there are 84 nations preparing to join it. And of course, is the financial effort to move to gold-pegged currency. In other words, to get out from under our financial hegemony. So you have, on the one hand, large numbers of people who are tired of being targets for U.S. military intervention and CIA meddling on the one hand, and on the other, you have people that said we don't want to be under the financial thumb of the United States and New York City any longer.
It's interesting about gold. Of course, the United States was on the gold standard until FDR partially took us off, and then Nixon completed the removal. And now you have these developing nations with a better understanding. I don't want to get into Economics 101, but I have to comment on this. I have a better understanding of Economics 101 and the value to stability of gold than the United States and the West has. You probably agree with me on that.
Oh, yeah, obviously. And I don't know how much gold we actually have. You'll recall that our friend, Dr. Ron Paul, has tried repeatedly, at least while he was in office, to audit the whole system and inspect the gold holdings.
Right.
He was never allowed to do so, which leads me to question just how much is really there. And that's not a good thing either. The Germans wanted to repatriate all of their gold, and I think they got something in the neighborhood of 60% back, but the rest continues to sit somewhere inside the United States, presumably under the streets of New York City. But who knows? And I think this is part of our problem. And you're right. Nixon said at the time, as you know, that this was a temporary measure, like so many other things in Washington, because we faced at that point financial ruin and crisis because LBJ had bankrupted us in Vietnam and with his war on poverty. And if you go back and look at those circumstances and look at where we are today, no one can take us off anything to rescue us at this point.
Remember Milton Friedman's famous one-liner, nothing in the world is more permanent than a temporary government program.
Exactly.
Does Russia have the upper hand in Europe today from and after Ukraine? That is it stronger than is its military stronger than the combined militaries of Europe?
Yes. Keep in mind that the combined militaries of Europe don't amount to much. We want to add up the amounts of money invested in defense, and we want to look at the numbers of people in 32 countries that might serve in the military, but it's entirely meaningless. Russia has an enormous advantage. It's homogenous. It's raised at a sizable force, now well over 800,000 and climbing. It speaks one language of command. It has one unified military command structure. It has absolute unity of effort. None of that exists in NATO. Everyone is sort of a Band-Aid over its gaping wound of incompetence, inefficiency, and ill-equipped character. In other words, everyone plugs in or tries to plug into the United States and its force. Our force is now minuscule. We couldn't send anything to Europe to make any difference right now, and anything short of 6 months to a year if we were lucky. So we're in no position to confront the Russians anywhere in Ukraine, period. And that's going to become very, very obvious in the months ahead when the Russian offensive sweeps out of its way whatever is in front of it. And we're going to watch, frankly, as we in Washington, our government, our people, and our NATO alliance is humiliated and is revealed as impotent and irrelevant.
You've been saying that for a while. You just said it a few minutes ago. The Russian military is stronger in many different measurements today than it was before the special military operation began, notwithstanding its initial foray of losses. Is there any question in your mind, Colonel McGregor, which side would win a land war today, Russia or NATO?
Absolutely none. The Russians would win hands down. There's no question about it. The good news is the Russians aren't interested in it. They don't want it. They never have. And what we interpreted as losses were not really significant at all at the beginning of the operation. It's simply that President Putin and the assumptions that he ordained for the military were inaccurate. He thought that he was going to go in with a small force, signal the seriousness with which Moscow takes our activities in Ukraine at the time, and that we would then say, oh, we need to stop this. This is a destructive war. Let's negotiate. And of course, he discovered quite the opposite. We were not only going to not negotiate, we were going to do everything in our power to destroy his country. We are now on the road to humiliation. That's the bottom line. We can't stop anything. And the $60 billion that Kurt Campbell mentioned is like taking a garden hose to a 5-alarm fire. Who are we kidding? It's a drop in the bucket. How much of it will ever get to Ukraine? Very little. How much of it will disappear into the corruption? Most of it. What doesn't go to Ukraine, which is more than half of it, will just circulate in Washington, make donors and constituents happy, and enrich the usual suspects in the defense industry and inside the Beltway. So it's just absurd.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
The clip.
Yes, we know that.
It is. It is.
What do you say to voters who are upset that those are the two choices?
Get over yourself. Those are the two choices.
Yeah, love that.
Right? And it's kind of like one is old and effective and compassionate, has a heart, and really cares about people, and one is old and has been charged with 91 felonies.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
Okay. Interesting.
I don't understand why this is even a hard choice, really. I
Yeah.
don't understand it.
Yeah.
But we have to go through the election, and hopefully people will realize what's at stake, because it's an existential question.
Hey, what's your message to people who aren't happy with either candidate? And she goes, my message is get over yourself. Is that helpful for the Joe Biden re-election effort?
I don't think she's
get over yourself.
It doesn't seem like she's using that expression correctly. Get over yourself is usually when you're not entitled to something. In this case, so she's saying, yeah, both the candidates suck, but get over yourself. We're not supposed to have good candidates.
Well, just imagine for almost everybody I know who is not ideologically possessed, which is the majority of people I know, would readily concede that it's insane that out of a country of 320 plus million people, running Trump versus Biden again is what we're left with. Like almost everybody would go, that by definition means that the system is broken to some level, to some degree. Because like, come on, there's just so many people who are better than these guys. I know people who are better. Almost everyone I know is better than these two guys. And so for the question to be like, well, what about people who go, hey, we don't think that like, and these are people who are like, hey, we don't really like Donald Trump. It's not as if someone was asking Hillary Clinton, what do you think about these hardcore Trump supporters? What's being asked of her is, what do you think about these guys who are like, yeah, we don't like Trump, but like, we got to run this fucking senile clown who sniffs children, has a horrible track record on everything. We got to run him. And she goes, my message is get over yourself. One's an old guy who loves everyone, and the other one's an old guy who's been strung up on all these charges. Ugh.
I think that there's been a reaction on the right to the excesses of the left. So because what the left did is they said that the Overton window ought to be closed so tight that no one can get inside the Overton window. Basically, if you're to the right of Hillary Clinton, you can't be allowed inside the Overton window.
World,
yes, exactly. and not just with regard to platforms, but with regard to publishers. So, for example, this week, NBC News deciding that Ronna McDaniel was too much for them. Ronna McDaniel can't work at NBC News. The sacred halls of NBC News must not be sullied by the former head of the RNC. Jen Psaki, however, can have a show on MSNBC despite being the press secretary for the White House 5 seconds ago. Right? The right's response to that is, I think, correct to say you guys have shut the Overton window too tight. But I think some elements of the right have basically said there is no Overton window. The Overton window should be completely exploded with regard not just to platforms, with which I kind of agree, but with regard to publishers. So NBC News not only has an obligation to hire Ronna McDaniel, NBC News has the obligation to hire Alex Jones, for example.
Right, which just makes no sense at a business level beyond free speech. I mean, there's a reason that networks exist.
Right, they have editorial positions. Yeah. Daily Wire has a very strong editorial position on a wide variety of issues. And by the way, I should say that there are a lot of people who are suggesting this is about disagreements over Israel. I mean, I can safely say it is not about disagreements over Israel, to the extent that, without reference to Candace at all here, Matt Walsh has taken the position that America ought not be involved in the Middle East at all.
Okay, I am a libertarian. I believe you should be allowed to do whatever you want to do with your business. But I also think other people should be allowed to accurately assess what you're doing with your business. So all I'm saying is that, all right, fine. But your Overton window is that you're not allowed to criticize Israel. Fine. But let's be honest about what your organization is then. And I know he got very offended with the tweet. I said, I don't know what Pat said about him, but he got very offended in that tweet we read earlier about Patrick Bet-David said we should rename ourselves the Daily Jewish Wire or whatever. But okay, but you're saying your Overton window is criticizing Israel. That's what you're not allowed to do. So, all right, fine. But then then okay, but then they're also allowed to describe you in the way that you're defining yourself. All right, fine. It's outside the Overton window to criticize Israel. All right, that's your Overton window. But it's well within my Overton window to point out that you are someone who made your career off opposing identity politics and opposing cancel culture. And you're involved in both. You're involved in both of those things. What really matters to you at the end of the day is your identity and the politics that follow from that. And what really matters to you is canceling anyone outside your Overton window. I think that's reasonable.
I think it's what we said on the last one. You're showcasing you're not interested in exploring truth. Unless you can kind of come forward and tell me exactly what she said that was outside of what you feel you're comfortable platforming. It seems like she was asking questions about what the nature of this conflict is and was exploring truth. And you're not interested in platforming that. You don't want to explore truth because part of what you guys do is pro-Israel propaganda and probably pro-war propaganda, just generally speaking.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't watch the shows regularly, but I've certainly seen, I think him supporting Ukraine war, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So that's, that's what you're doing. So, and by the way, that's because you don't want truth. Sometimes you got to overwhelm people with the same perspective, because if you got another show host who's asking questions that make sense, same as during COVID. Wait, how come I'm not allowed to sit on a plane? How come when I sit down in a restaurant, my mask comes off?
Right.
How come I can't be outside? Sometimes just a couple common sense questions and people start going, oh yeah, this doesn't really make sense. And so you can't have common sense in front of people because they might wake up a little bit. And so you know what you do? You censor them by removing them and making sure that no one can hear that information. And you just openly said that that's what you're doing, that you're treating questions about Israel the same as, things that we would understand censoring on a platform, like an overtly racist statement, a call for aggression towards other groups of people. Like there are things that you go, all right, I understand why you're not going to pay for this. But when people are just asking questions and searching for truth and you go, well, we can't have that here. It's censorship.
Yeah.
Israeli weapons makers are selling some weapons platforms that have been utilized during the onslaught in Gaza. Now that sounds obscene, but this is the arms business, so obscenity is part of it. Tel Aviv's arms industry has found buyers among several Asian countries as Washington tries to make allies in the region, preparing for a future war with China. This is the interesting part, I think, Dr. Paul, because there are a lot of people that claim that as an ally, Israel doesn't really bring anything to the table for the U.S. I think this is an example where they actually do, but it's not for the U.S. people, it's for the U.S. arms industry. They're going around the world selling arms to countries that want to have a war with China. So they're kind of doing our bidding in stirring up war, not peace overseas.
Well, some of the other countries like Afghanistan, they do sell weapons. We know about how these countries that we put the weapons in there. But I would think this is more evidence just from a practical viewpoint. Why are we still sending weapons over there if they can make their own? Get them from somebody else. But of course, the non-intervention position is you don't give them money, intelligence, or anything else. You treat them as friends. And you treat them equally with everybody.
Exactly.
But not to subsidize them. So that's what I think. I hope that is the prevailing issue that's developing, on all these issues of on war funding, especially with Ukraine and the money that could be spent elsewhere. Because that is the important thing. Is if they see this as a false, it's an illusion that all of a sudden this is necessary for our national security.
Yeah.
See, I think when you get in a crowd and start talking about this, people, even if they're not with us on, libertarianism, they might say, well, that does make sense. Well, how does it really help us? But boy, some of them just, love it for the sake of loving that type of activities. There's a bunch of those people too.
Yeah, that's true. Well, here's what they did. If you put on that next clip, they went to an arms show in Singapore to demonstrate their weapons to the people who are enemies of China. And the U.S. has long been trying to court the Philippines and a couple of other countries down there who've wavered back and forth. We need to have like a base over there that we can provoke China with. So back to the article by Kyle. In coverage of the Singapore arms event, Haaretz notes that some of the drones touted by the Israeli arms dealers were used by Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh last year. Last year, the Azeris completed an ethnic cleansing of the region by forcing the enclave's last 100,000 residents out of the Republic of Artsakh and into Armenia. An Israeli official said it was primarily seeking clients who did not buy Chinese arms. Quote, ultimately, all the countries in the region are threatened by the Chinese. A senior figure in one of the Israeli defense companies told Haaretz, here at this air show, they don't buy fighter jets from China. So they've already been tested by Azerbaijan, which completed an ethnic cleansing of ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. And so they're pretty good for ethnic cleansing, so that's what they're taking to the market, I guess.
So many people, especially right now, they have this bizarre position that we have to deal with China, they're taking away our business, and we have to slap them down and this sort of thing. If we just back off, and they'll self-destruct like we're doing to ourselves. So they would take care of the problems that we think we have to be there. But unfortunately, there's a money issue involved too, which is a driving force for so much of what they do.
Yeah. And this is what Politico has to say about it. Inside the House's GOP surveillance law nightmare, if we can put that up. This is Speaker Johnson again being brutally battered and beaten about the head and body with a raucous Republican group in the House. But we've talked about it before. Section 702 of the FISA Reform Act, which was passed in that era where we passed the Patriot Act that let them spy on us, but they promised it would just sunset. Then they passed the FISA reform stuff, and they said, don't worry, it'll sunset. It's only for the bad guys. And then Ed Snowden came around, and others and saying, well, actually, no, they're spying on you, and that's what it's all about. So we passed some more reform stuff. So reform. But at the end of the day, what it means is they don't want to let go of the ability to spy on us. And what it is, and I'm just going to, this is a paragraph that explains it pretty well, hopefully in a way that's understandable, if you can put this one up. Reapproving the section of the FISA, Foreign Intelligence Service Surveillance Act, known as Section 702, it allows the intelligence community to collect and search through communications of foreign targets without a warrant. And this is the article says it was always going to be difficult given the sour relationship between some Republicans and the FBI. But that skepticism, which dates back to the FBI's initial investigation into Trump's campaign in 2016, is only the start of the party's problems on surveillance policy, according to interviews. So essentially what it is, Dr. Paul, to reiterate, and you know this well, is they can suck up everything as long as it's a foreign target. But say you got a call from Iran. Hey, Dr. Paul, you want to come on our show? Then they would suck up not only that call, but everything that you have in your information. And if you called me and said, hey, what are we going to do for the show tomorrow? Then they would suck me into it. So they suck all this stuff without a warrant. And a lot of people are opposed to doing that. They want to retain that ability to do that.
And who follows up on all this, the details? This is the CIA.
Yeah.
And, this nonsense that started with the Patriot Act and fell through with FISA, it exists. There's always been a little bit, but it's much worse. And my contention is that the republic has been destroyed in this country. And who takes over when there's a vacuum? And I think it's the CIA and other agencies like
NSA,
that.
yeah.
And you can't touch them. But there was always this idea that they were sacred and it was a patriotic thing to do, except I think it's starting to shift a little bit, just like these interventionist wars. The attitude is shifting too. So I would say there are some good signs out there, but we should have a long way to go to get people to accept the idea that you don't need those type of agencies spying on our enemies when they usually are spying on us.